All right, we're here for the Tax Increment Financing Study Group on February 22, a little bit past 1 o'clock. Thanks everybody for coming. I think we've decided of our 8 or 9 meetings so far, it's rained every single one of them. Except for maybe the last meeting, so I don't know what that means, but it's another downpour for another TIF meeting. Today, I guess we transition from the studying part of our job to the formulating part of our job, and so today there's no real agenda, although I guess before I talk any further, we do have the minutes from February 8 that aren't up online yet, but will be by Monday. I'd entertain a motion to accept those.
I move the acceptance of the minutes from February 8th.
Second.
Any
necessary corrections.
any discussion? All right, all in favor of adopting the minutes? Any opposed? All right, so the February 8th minutes are adopted. The only other thing we've got to do today is figure out everything we're going to recommend. That's all. And so we did put up online. I had said that after our last meeting that I would try to collect from my notes just ideas and questions for us to consider. I decided I was definitely going to not try to make it perfect. I tried to have a rough organization, and it's been up online since Monday, and you all have had it since the weekend. And I guess before I open it up, the only real general idea that I have in mind is that I think there's some of these. I think there's some things that we can agree on that would be recommendations that would be for transparency, some for substance that could be adopted immediately. And I think there's other things that probably need more time to work through. And so if we figured out a way to let the tax increment financing function for the city get turned back on, because it's off right now, with certain recommendations that go into effect right away and certain recommendations that get further considered and have a year to be implemented and making up an amount of time, it would get everybody past the election and let it happen, and that's as far as I've gotten.
Okay, you could have some short-term things you can do in the first 6 months and then beyond the first 6 month period.
I do too think, there's probably a couple of topics like, how do we provide more budget assurance, which is going to require more people, I think, getting in the room and looking at this parcel by parcel. I think some of the stuff around the design review committee and other things is going to require kind of a working group over here that I think maybe ultimately where you're headed is maybe 3 buckets, which is some immediate things that we can all get behind, or the majority of us get behind, some things that still talking, studying that could be a year out, and we've fostered some other working groups where we know we need some efficiencies and some more work, but it's not necessarily the work of the committee.
Right.
And that's my question. We were given a particular task. That task is completed. There's some ongoing things. Who or what are the entities that should be the recipients and those who will be responsible for acting upon the recommendations? Because too often recommendations like this just get made and that's the end of it. And we've spent too much time, and I think it's too important an issue to let that happen.
Yeah, that is definitely a thing we're going to have to figure out. I'm confident that some of it would be appropriate for council action, and we've got the convenience of, like, I can't make passed legislation happen, but I can make introduced legislation happen. And my intent all along is the timing of this group was that we'd be done in April, which leaves 2 months, 3 months before the end of the term, and I think some of the legislation that's currently pending could have been. I think I had the votes. I could have passed it a few months ago when we held up for this study group. So I think there's legislation that can be passed before the end of the term.
Could you, just for the listening audience, tell them about the moratorium that you agreed?
Sure.
It was
So
agreed to.
back in September and October, I had 3 pieces of legislation pending that are on the final page of the document we've got online for today. In exchange for deferring those, the council and the administration and MDHA agreed to have a freeze on new tax increment financing loans through June 30, 2019. And so 2 of the 3 pieces of legislation are deferred until July 2nd, and 1 till May 21. All 3 of those dates are after this group's work should be done. And my intention, my hope that we've got some agreed upon set of things. I don't know what they'll be, but my hope is that if we have an agreed set of recommendations that most people, hopefully in the council, feel like there's enough perspectives represented here and we put enough work in that
There's consensus.
we should run with what we come up with. Obviously, one never knows with the Metro Council, but that would be my hope. And then beyond that, Paulette, I don't know. I mean, it's IDB, MDHA, Mayor's Office, elections coming up. I think we'll make sure everybody has the recommendations.
I think to the extent possible, and it may not be possible, we might recommend where it goes, who has responsibility for implementing. However, I'm not sure because we don't know what the recommendations will be, but I just don't want a report to be issued and that's the end of it and it just kind of falls by the wayside.
That's a great idea. I think recommending or saying who the recommendation is addressed toward is a good idea. So, I mean, I've got some general ideas of short-term and long-term stuff, but I'd like to hear from you all. If you have ideas or want to talk about it, or I could.
Do you want to go to your document?
Sure. Again, not necessarily in any kind of final order. I mean, in looking at what I identified as goals, the first section there, I think Brian is the one who's said it most clearly throughout. If you're going to use the but-for test for judging economic incentives, that it's really important to understand. I guess Paulette's talked a lot about this too, about what is the goal? What are you judging against? What are you trying to accomplish? And I think we've heard loud and clear that is both geographic, it's a where and a what, and I would, and I think it's more of a. This is not we could figure it out in the next 2 months. I think this is more of a longer term. I would love for a recommendation to be that tax increment financing should be judged against goals of where and what that are updated periodically in a way that is.
Who sets those goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think. First of all, we've also heard about, maybe it's going to make sense in the future to have more TIF through the IDB because of redevelopment districts maybe being tapped out because we're pretty redeveloped. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. And so you'd like to have some common thinking among different agencies that are looking at TIF.
I just think that it's you've obviously got to have the executives take on where it's important, but you've also got to have community input in terms of that. They have to feel that they've been heard and that their districts and their interests are represented. Of course, MDHA has. I mean, who are if you had to identify the the 5 key, I'm just making up a number,
Yeah.
the 5 key stakeholders that should be involved in goal setting, who would they be?
I think you said public, executive branch,
Legislative?
branch. You know, in theory, MDHA is both independent, but
definitely a dotted
derivative.
line.
You know, like all its governance is appointed by Metro, so I would think they should be at the table.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
What about the development community?
Yeah, I mean, they're the
Although
ones.
I like to think of us, if I'm representing that, as the public,
The public interest as well?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but
Is that a
so I
separate?
would think that there are people who have a whole, I mean, if you start breaking down the community, you get into 100 different, but yeah, I think some kind of interested parties would be really,
Yeah,
really.
I just think that can't reside with a single individual or a single body, and the recommendation needs to flush that out, that there needs to be, all voices need to be heard.
I think planning
Planning.
probably needs to be at the table.
Yeah, and that was the
Exactly.
point I was going to make. And the reason I'm making it is much of the development, well, that's not exactly, some development in Nashville has often been parcel by parcel, as opposed to a more comprehensive and holistic approach that takes a look at the whole city. And that's part of the role of what planning departments do. And one is beginning to hear that particular refrain repeated over and over, that we can no longer continue to do development parcel by parcel, because it's going to be, you know, scattered. And I know we have the redevelopment districts, but I would think that planning should be in it as well.
And I think that's one of the things they're trying to do with the corridor studies.
With what?
With the corridor studies, you know, look at some broader areas instead of these single shot projects.
And as we're looking at kind of implementation and things like that, you've got X number of redevelopment districts today. I think thinking through, you know, where are they, how are they working? And then are there other areas that might need to be looked at in that same way?
And I think one of the crucial points that we have made is that a 30 or 40 year, whatever, designation of a redevelopment district, absent perfect foresight, is probably not the way to go, and that there needs to be opportunities for reevaluation on a systematic and continuing basis, that it shouldn't be so long that it's hyper-developed and we're still calling it blighted, nor should it be so short that there isn't an opportunity for the economic mechanics to work.
And we have to blend in that it does have to be long enough to make a lender do the loan.
Yes.
Right.
And I mean, I'll just throw out what I've had in mind on this, and like I'm totally open to debate on the numbers, but to me, the idea of any new one is going to probably be for 30 years. That seems to be the number that historically has been used. And so the idea of saying, and that has to do with making lenders do the loans. The idea of saying after 10 years, the council and MDHA both have to sign off on there still being blight in order to keep doing new loans. It has to stay in place for the existing loans. Otherwise,
Right.
it doesn't work.
Yeah, the
And
financing
then
piece would
reassess
get tricky.
every X number of years after that.
I might take a slightly varied approach on that. I mean, I think one of the things we've learned in here, and you and Richard can correct me if I'm wrong, but blight is the determination that's made at the beginning of that 30-year plan. And just because blight goes away or reduces during that period doesn't mean that you might turn off the district or might turn off the TIF. But I mean, even to the but-for thing, but-for is not part of the legislation. It's not part of the legal requirement, as I understanding. It's where the conversation has evolved, but it's public benefit. And today, I think we're learning from this committee, subject to maybe what we hear on March the 6th and thereafter, I think people would generally say public benefit looks a lot like infrastructure and affordable housing, but that might be different 5 years from now or 7 years from now. And so, I mean, I think part of the way to wrap in some of this is how you go back and, I mean, where you're headed, how you go back periodically and look at the plan that's in place and the mechanics of updating that. Do you have opportunities for public hearings and public comments so that you are tracking with that and those decisions aren't being made because the goals may change as a part. Big picture goals may not change, but district by district goals may very well change because, as we know today, the downtown district and the Gulch district look a lot different today than they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But there may be still a need in some places for public benefit that evolves and matches kind of the politics and the community conversation that's out there.
Is that assuming you're looking at it by district and not by parcel?
Yeah, I think that's district.
Yeah,
Well, so-
because I'm thinking, if you're dealing with it by parcel, you're dealing with a particular developer. You can't, I hate to use this word, but bait and switch.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you can't go back. You can't apply it retroactively.
No.
Exactly.
But to say,
You gotta
and
be
I'm
super careful
looking
with
at
that.
Joe to nod, but so that the loan you make in 2025 might look different than the loan you made in 2020.
You would hope so.
Exactly.
Because if it's really working the way that it's supposed to, you may not need TIF to subsidize a office building or a hotel. It may be housing. And you'd hate to shut down a tool that it's just the way that it's used over time. And so I really like the review process in a way to be able to change how those what it's used for.
I like those comments. Let me see if I can say it back. So this is very general still, but the idea would be I've made up 10 years. After 10 years, it could be 7, it could be 5, it could be 12, I don't know. After 10 years, that there's a reassessment through a public process about where the focus of TIF dollars should be.
And maybe exactly. And maybe it's an assessment of, the accomplishments of what were there, the objectives and needs of this particular district, and then how those can be most effectively utilized with tax increment financing. It may be that that there's not a need, or there's something that you need to use it for something completely different.
Well,
But you'd hate to lose the tool if the city chooses to use the
I
tool.
think it presents an opportunity to show that it works, because after that 10-year period, you can show that maybe it's brought additional things to a particular community. So you take away this narrative of it's just a handout or whatever, that you can see a community being transformed over a period of time.
and we could like the Skyline redevelopment district, if that periodic assessment had been done and there'd been a listing of successes and challenges and opportunities, that would show, well, gee, not a whole lot of progress got made. But you could pick one, the Gulch, and started in 98. So if you did it in, an assessment in 08, it would have said,
Wow.
we're making some progress. And then if you did it again in 18, it would be.
We got what we came for.
Yeah.
Right.
But I really think the idea, Tyler, that you had where you recognize your successes and failures, because there is no view today of whether those investments were valuable or not.
Right.
So I think that it was incredibly valuable that AT&T came downtown in 1992 or whatever it was and brought 2,000 people. They're not there today, but the fact that that commitment was made was 30 years ago transformative. But we don't ever get a chance to really
talk about that.
And they're ones that have been, and their successors and failures. So, and I think that if we can learn from that over time, that's where, this could be really beneficial.
What is, if we don't have to be wed to it, but I've been saying 10 years and then every 5 years after that. What's y'all's sense about frequency and when?
All the guys that know better.
There's no right answer.
How often is Nashville Next done?
How often? I thought it was every 4 years, but somebody told me that's not the case.
It's not.
It's like every 20.
It's like 20, I think.
15.
20 years. It's more than 10.
And it was a lot between Nashville Next and the time that it was.
It took them
sitting
4
around
years
being
to
the old
do
guy
it.
around the table. This is so wonderful. The plan before that was 28, 30 years before. It was a long time before that we had a general plan for the city.
The only reason I ask, and this may be an awful idea, but I just wonder if you couldn't marry that up with something that's already, a process that's already in place somewhere, that's already taking public comment, that is already structured to do that, so that one, you have a really organized system, and two, you don't have to go back and that may not be possible.
Yeah, if it's every 25 years, that's not going to work.
Right.
Correct.
Although, as we're talking about this, this sounds, you guys hopefully have no good reason to know this, but the planning department has been working really hard over the last couple of years to modernize the city's capital improvements budget, to categorize expenses, and they've got certain criteria that people can quibble over whether all the criteria are good and how they measure them, but they seek to grade projects about how much they match Nashville Next, and so theoretically, if you look at like 1 year, I understand some council person put like literally a spaceport in the capital improvements budget.
Councilman Darden.
And so that
I remember that.
That was the UFO landing pad.
that would be.
Somebody said, but there aren't UFOs. He said, they don't have any place to land.
So that would.
That was a lot of years ago. I heard
Planning would theoretically grade that poorly.
Theoretically.
Yeah. I don't know.
Unless they know something that you don't.
Right. But they might be in a good position to help with measuring success. Because I don't know. What do you think about that, Talia?
I don't think there's any other organization in Metro that could even come close to doing that other than planning. They're best positioned to help with that.
And they're also, they're also the organization that's probably works closest with MDHA of any other, although we're spending a lot of time with finance. But,
I love MDHA people coming to visit.
But that almost seems like a natural relationship just in terms of an extension of some of the work that the groundwork has already been laid on.
And I almost wish that we could set out some 30,000, foot goals and task these guys to get to, as opposed to us saying planning needs to do it and this guy needs to. What if we just got the people that are really engaged in this?
It's like, this is what we'd like to do.
Here's what we'd like to accomplish. Here's what our thoughts are.
How do we do
Come
it?
back and let us know what you think.
Well, let me drop in sort of a semi-related point that is useful to know is so the director of planning, Lucy Kempf, is very interested in what we're doing, and things like the design review process. I think she is very interested in being available to figure out with MDHA how to best streamline that process, because they have so many resources. I know they could use more, but they've got a lot of professionals, and so the idea of there could be a set of topics that we would bring to Lucy and say, would like, help brainstorm with us.
You know what, go ahead.
Should we be seeking input from people like that before we finalize his recommendations?
Yeah. Well, I think there, when we get through the whole thing, I think there's some of the, I think there's stuff that we're going to be able to say, let's just run with it. But everything we're talking about so far is stuff that we're not going to figure out in the next month.
And I think
There are
having
things
a
we're going to have to
cudgel-
hand off to
lay the
other people.
groundwork.
Well, and I don't mind having a cudgel out there that says, you guys have got to, just because we're saying that you need to do this and you just go meet to death and it never happens, back to what you were talking
Yeah.
about, Paula. I mean, I think you wouldn't want that to happen either.
No, and I'll be transparent about this. From a the only way I know how to make that happen is from a legislative point of view, is to have bad things happen if we get a year down the road. I don't know what bad things are,
Yeah.
but to have stuff happen a year down the road if there's not boxes that have been checked and figured out.
Or, not asking for more work, but if they met and came back and we had a chance to listen, understand, and review, could actually maybe help and add value.
Yeah. Right. I totally agree. It's the main thing, I think, on the timing point of view is the executive does matter here, and I don't know what the percent odds of there being continuity at mayor, but it's not 100 right now. Might be high, but it's not 100, and so on some level, really can't make material progress until September, and that's just
Yeah.
a reality. I think planning and MDHA and other departments can figure out a bunch of stuff between now and the end of the summer, but to the extent that anybody wants to walk in the mayor's office and say, how do you feel about this?
That's something I'd like for you to think about, and I haven't said this to anybody, so I'll say it. Think about, as we start to craft the report, things that we might be able to do legislatively, but things that we think might be better suited for any mayors, through an executive order. For instance, the mayor may be able to convene a group like this once a year or something, just to check in to see how we're doing on the implementation of the recommendations. So there may be a way to do some things both ways. So I don't know what goes in what direction and who's sitting in the leadership chair, because I do think it's going to be a balance of both.
Yeah.
But I think that then you get executive buy-in if you've got something going on the other side as well. Just think about that.
All right, so one other thing to think about while you're thinking about
Yeah,
stuff.
I haven't included on anything.
Really,
Brainstorming, right?
I did not anticipate this when we started this process in October. I did not anticipate what we've heard about IDB TIF, and just the reality of IDB TIF being able to be parcel by parcel, not in a redevelopment district, and the reality that it might be hard to create redevelopment districts going forward. So much of our conversations had to do with MDHA, which does have infrastructure. IDB has got, one borrowed employee, but
Part-time.
you would like if we've talked about transparency and people who aren't insiders being able to figure it out, and if some developer rolls in from wherever and just tries to figure out TIF, do we want there to be a place where they formally go first that is actually accurate and works, or do they have to figure out who's on the IDB board, who's MDHA, where do I go?
Well, and as a developer who has been here for a long time, the thought of doing an IDB TIF is just really intriguing to me.
I bet.
So, and I'm not sure that that's really, that feels like a really almost gunslinger approach, if you will, that anybody that's got whatever to take it to them and get it done can drop tax
Very
increment financing anywhere.
Well,
for you.
I mean, I'll tell you, there's the other part that's been eye-opening to me is,
And that would be bad. That would just not
But
be
doesn't
good.
IDB TIF still has to be approved by the council?
I don't think so.
No, it doesn't.
I thought it did.
I don't think it does. Just requires the
I should
IDB
have just
approval.
asked for it directly as opposed to.
His
posing
memo
that
is
as
coming
an
out again.
Open-ended
You know,
question.
part of the problem is I understand the MDHA TIF thing. These other things, I've just read the
No,
statute. I've never
you're
done
right.
one.
He's right, because we had to
Council.
take that amendment up there for Bellevue recently. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, so Bert,
Yeah.
the other reason why it's been on my mind is there is somebody in town who's an experienced user of TIF who has, because somehow the mayor's office made me the gatekeeper now, so they send everybody.
Such as if you can go convince Councilman Mendez.
Right.
So you're ready to go.
I've sent 2 or 3 people this way.
This moratorium.
So there's somebody with
I probably know why.
a facially reasonable project that wants IDB TIF, and because it's not a redevelopment district, and that's made me wonder, like,
Yeah.
what are we doing with that? If redevelopment districts sort of get tapped out, then I guess it stands to reason that at some level people might be interested in
And
that.
then what if councilmanic courtesy applies to an IDB TIF, is they're going through, if you do have to go through council,
Well,
you could
They
really.
do. They do.
When the legislation was being, I was deferring my legislation, the primary voice wondering what the heck I was doing in freezing TIF was the person whose district this project sits in.
So they came to see you.
So I think that's a legitimate concern, and whatever we do, this idea of goals about where, what, how much we want to invest, so we know what the predictability is. It has to include IDB TIF also. I think.
I do know one restriction. If the increment, the IDB TIF increment is to pay for anything other than public infrastructure, you have to get the approval of the comptroller and commissioner of ECD.
And the
Justin
commissioner
and
of what?
Bobby Roth.
But anything other than infrastructure, but like a lot of these projects we've seen,
A lot of
you
people
can
do
get.
a lot of
Mostly
infrastructure.
infrastructure.
10% is going to be infrastructure just about anyway.
Right.
But
Right.
I would offer one other thing about the IDB. To the extent coming out of this committee that we and some segment of the public that's paying attention gets comfortable with the transparency in the process of MDHA as to how TIFs are evaluated, analyzed, underwritten, et cetera, and not just to speak for MDHA, but it's conceivable that to the extent that IDB is a relevant piece, instead of causing them to go staff up and put some duplicative staff and processes in place, I think MDHA, under an MOU or otherwise, would be willing to do some of that same work to the extent that it was legal, and to the extent that you were going to the IDB for a reason, not because you were trying to work around MDHA, but I think to the extent that we leave this process and people say, okay, if MDHA can do that, that is a good thing, and we have confidence in that process.
You'd
we
hate to
can
have
make
two
that
people
process.
bidding, two government agencies bidding against each other, duplicating exactly what
I don't
they're
know
doing.
how to skin the cat, but my sense has been if IDB TIF is going to go from a one-time thing ever to that's a thing the city would even consider, like we have to create a process,
Yeah.
not multiple processes, and so I think, like I don't know if it needs a lot of attention or recommendations, but I would feel like somewhere in the recommendations it should be do if there's going to be more IDB TIF, don't create a separate
Right.
universe.
I would
think
just
we're-
like to make sure we alert the chair of the IDB.
Who is the chair of the
I think
IDB
it's,
now?
is it Ginger Hauser now?
Ginger Hauser.
It's Ginger Hauser now. I just don't want a recommendation to come from this group.
That they're getting into TIF business.
Yeah.
What?
Before. How did we end up in this report?
So now we got like 7 things that we're supposed to think about while we're thinking about things.
Yes, that's how you do.
But that's why I think today can be really valuable, is
Just
begin to
talk.
really
Yeah.
figure out some of this stuff.
So we've done a great job of talking about the stuff that'll take a lot more work. And we're to Bert's point, we're gonna have to all digest and figure out, because I think we've said this all, but to summarize, we're gonna want to identify what the more work is. We're gonna want to make a recommendation of who ought to be looking at that, or maybe who should be working together to look at it. Hopefully, we're gonna suggest some sort of timeline for it.
I'll give you a couple of ideas that I think are pretty simple,
Sure.
and they relate on the transparency piece.
Yeah.
So to me, it would be great, maybe in here already, but some kind of published place of how you go about getting a TIF, so that it's up, it's on the website, anybody can find it. That's kind of one simple thing. Number 2, I think that it would, sorry, Joe, I think that it would be really great if MDHA would, in whether it's by redevelopment district, by councilmanic district, by multiple, is just to invite people in to understand how tax increment financing works. If you're a developer, community development person, anybody, to have workshops around the
Couple
community,
symposiums a year.
where you're just invited to TIF 101, and if you've got an interest, sign up to meet with, so-and-so who is walking you through the process, so that it is available to anybody and everybody, and that they understand, how the process works. Another idea might be to set aside a pool of money. I'd want to understand this better, but my thought, trying to get to this diversity and equity side of things where, today, if you're a developer and you're doing TIF, somebody's got to stand as the guarantor of that. And that becomes a cumbersome and expensive and potentially frightening process. Maybe there is a somebody administered TIF that is, where there's somebody else is underwriting the financial risk at a smaller amount for a specific use. Maybe it's a pool of $500,000 to start to work in X% type of neighborhood with these type of borrowers, so that we get some experience as a way to deal with, making it easier for people to accomplish.
Well, I want to come back to that one. Do you have any more
No,
while you're
just-
rattling them off?
Just thinking.
So
Give
on
them
that,
something to think about.
that last idea, I'm unfortunately spent some of my life drafting and litigating documents for secured transactions. So I know more about this than I really want to. But the one risk that I was worried about coming up with some pool is then creating the disincentive where the developer has got less skin in the
Yeah,
game.
they don't have to pay back, or thinks they don't.
And so I need Richard to think about this. But what I started wondering about is whether there could be I feel bad being such a dork here, but I'm going to do it. Whether the part of the TIF transaction could be Metro or somebody having a contingent note purchase agreement where if there's a default by the borrower that and the guarantee, and it's been a financial default and it's uncured, that Metro
Takes the property.
would pay it, get the loan documents, and while it would be non-recourse, so the bank could never get the property, make it so Metro could get the property. And I think that could be documented. It's a no purchase agreement, an additional lien, an extra party on a subordination agreement. But you're the guy on this.
Yeah.
You made that comment earlier, and I thought about it, and I thought, some of these government programs work by giving you like a 90% guarantee or something like that. And so that would also have the lender have some skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not going to lose their shirt, but they're not necessarily going to collect 100 cents on the dollar and all their interest and everything else if they make a bad loan. So I was trying to figure out how you get the discipline of the lenders underwriting into this, because we're not equipped. I mean, Metro's
Right.
not equipped to. So
Right.
this is a good loan, this is a bad loan.
I wondered about that, leaving the lender with some skin in the game on it also, and my thought was,
They could be the administrator. A bank could be the administrator, sort of.
so what I worried about on that is then that would just, they would cover that risk. I mean, they wouldn't actually take the risk. They would just be that much more stringent on their underwriting, which would maybe be counterproductive for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, although, These lenders have got Community Reinvestment Act responsibilities, and there are reasons for them to want to participate in a program like you're describing.
So a couple things to put in the mix there. One, I think we need to recognize that we're taking what is intended to be a non-risk, non-recourse program to MDHA and or the government, and at least introducing some level of risk and recourse. Having said that, I think it's worth it, right? Because, I think the main thing that I've learned that I did not have an appreciation for that when it came into this is a couple of the reasons that deals aren't being done in some other redevelopment districts, particularly because there would be a smaller deal, is one, kind of your cost of borrowing, right? To hire Richard and others to do that, and you can't really stand in the gap on the guarantee, either because you don't have the ability or because you've never done that or don't have the. And when we talk about insiders, it's not really insiders. It's the reason these deals are getting done is because they're at such a level of sophistication, it goes to a level of people who are doing it. So I think you could create something there, and I guess as I've thought about it and had a conversation or two within MDHA, maybe less of a pool and more of a reserve fund, so that there's still some recourse to the developer. The biggest recourse is they may lose what they have in it at some point. But MDHA's interests are aligned because they really don't want to take that property back. They're underwriting it as well, and the bank is underwriting it. And everybody recognizes that is worst case scenario, but you do put a few more tools in there that would allow you to stretch on some things that otherwise might not get done just because of the experience or the financial wherewithal of the borrower or the size project.
And I haven't fully thought through this, but one concern that I had is the reason we use tax increment financing is because it produces a lot of tax revenue. I mean, there's a reason we finance big hotels, shiny office buildings and things. It's because it's creating a pool of money. And some of the types of projects we're now talking about are not going to create a big chunk of taxes, And so you've got to either find some way to get money out of one pocket into another one. It's not just.
I think that goes back to the goals. And I think we've had enough of a history of the big shiny new projects. And if we're having some great deficits with tax collection, that's another thing, and we've got to balance that. And that's one of the reasons I want to make sure we address Talia's problem of her office being able to predict and anticipate. And I think that's a level of I guess, kind of metrics and whatever
Yeah.
measurement and predictions that we have not done.
We are making great strides on that front. I can't say that enough.
Okay, well, that's good, but I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, some of that's blocking and tackling, right? I mean, It's
Yeah.
just sitting there looking at the agreements and so forth.
Exactly.
And there is a little bit of uncertainty about when projects come online, and so that,
That's the magic.
yeah.
Well, and with this other program, which kind of ties into that as well, you know, you get a project and MDHA is in a perfect position to see this, that all of a sudden that loan is potentially in default, but we know a reappraisal is a year and a half out, right? And we really don't want to tap the reserve fund. We also, MDHA or the city or whoever, has enough stake, enough credibility to go to the bank and say, we need to hold on for a year and a half, right? Let's reset it, do what we got to do, but we have an idea of where the reappraisal in this would be, which would begin to catch this up and potentially fix it. That allows you have a couple other folks with credible voices in that process.
So, go ahead.
Back to your point, Richard. So if you had a $500,000 project and a $50,000 TIF that was going in for infrastructure for, you know, new water lines and this and whatever the items are that are on there, the math should be the same whether it's 10% of the project cost is covered by the tax on the $500,000. It should be the same as if you added.
Except you get back to your issuance cost and the level of sophistication is required to do that.
See,
And that's what I'm trying to do
that.
is to set up something that doesn't require that kind of level of sophistication and whatever.
Well, and I think we go to the major law firms and those who know how to do this and say, look, we'd like you all to contribute some time to this. You'll be paid, but at a reduced rate, and you know, but because this is important to the overall viability of the
Make a
of the TIF
template.
process. And I mean, just like you've got folks that help entrepreneurs that you've got some standard documents, et cetera. You still need somebody looking over your shoulder, but that you know. You want to make sure they're well represented, but at the same time,
And you can find people to do that. I spent 9 years chairing the Urban Housing Solutions Board. I'm on the Housing Fund Board now, so it's just one more extension of that.
Another
You do that
suggestion.
right after the minutes?
my guess is he can do that quicker than that. And that's not a criticism of the minutes. That is, as many times as he's done this, he knows how.
Well, I think Paulette hit on the starting point. Is the goals conversation, and we sort of jumped in. I think we jumped in hearing a consensus that the idea of figuring out a way to get the diversity of TIF loan recipients to be more diverse
Yes.
would
That's the
likely
goal.
be a goal. Like
That's
we
the
all
goal.
are on board with that.
Yes, that should be a goal.
And if you establish that as a goal and you make the assumption that it might involve lower size loans, I bet MDHA could look at loans below a certain size over time and come up with some profile of what successful ones look like, which would help with cities underwriting, if you will.
And we've been left holding the bag on some.
It's a small handful, yeah. What Bert was saying about it being a percentage, that is the truth. And so as we've gone back and looked over the years, and it has actually kind of played out somewhere around that 10% is what it can support. That works, and it is the underwriting cost, and it's the legal fees and the issuance costs, and what that does. And years ago, it set a threshold saying you really have to do at least $1 million project, because doing a TIF loan for less than $100,000 doesn't
never
make
gonna
sense.
You can't afford it. You can't afford
Because
it.
you would spend $50,000 trying to close a $100,000 loan. And so, at that point in time, you may do better to borrow the money somewhere else at another interest rate. And so, if you could figure out how to get those closing costs down to, whereas the closing costs as it would be on a mortgage, for instance, then all of a sudden it would make it more appealing to the smaller projects. And I mean, from our perspective, it doesn't hit us one way or the other.
Well, another possibility, and one of the things that the council's done is to stop the recycling of funds after initial owners repay. You could take some of those funds and use them to fund other types of projects that wouldn't necessarily generate that kind of tax revenue on their own.
And we're allowed that to be your reserve fund
Right.
for a similar type
Right.
need.
I mean, I think, I suspect that starts getting dicier politically. Just, I mean,
Yes.
there's some history of
That's
Can't have it both ways.
Metro never getting any money.
That's why they started in the first place, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think one thing you need to remember here is on using TIF for infrastructure, it's really not any different. Metro's spending its money for something that it thinks is publicly desirable. And it really doesn't matter if Talia puts some money in the public works budget and says, we're going to put sidewalks all throughout the Gulch. We're going to pay for that out of public works. Or if you incentivize some developer and say, you know, you're going to build this big hotel, it's going to generate a lot of money, and we want you to take some of that money and build sidewalks. And so it's the same dollars, right?
I mean, I'll
But
take
there are,
it.
but there are decisions to be made about whether or not that's the best use of that dollar.
Right.
I'll take the, I definitely,
That's the
I mean, I
question.
understand, I definitely understand the point. I mean, the counterpoint, well, first of all, the other point in favor of doing it that way that you didn't mention is the developer bears the risk of it failing rather than Metro bearing the risk of it failing. The flip side is what Talia said, is that while we can sit here and say, well, if the city's going to spend $50 million on infrastructure, what difference does it make if it's $50 million through a bond issuance or 35 through a bond issuance and 15 through foregoing property tax revenue? It's still $50 either way, $50 million either way. We can say that, but the reality is that one goes through an annual appropriation budget and one doesn't, and therefore politically it ends up being different.
Well, there's a policy decision being made, and that's
Yeah.
the question, is
Exactly.
where's that decision going to get made? And I think what we've traditionally done is the council said, we're willing to let X number of dollars be allocated to these types of projects for economic development. And then let MDHA figure out how that money gets allocated within the redevelopment districts
Or outside.
or outside.
Yeah, and theoretically, I think the thought has been, that investment is juiced, aside from the risk, that investment is juiced by whatever is being built on as a part of it.
Yeah.
As opposed to a standard plan that's out there that's,
Well, this is sort of a free-ranging conversation, and I'm going to try to take it.
I'm loving this conversation.
I'm going to move it in a different
I can't
direction.
wait to get my IDB TIF.
So, we've said it several times, infrastructure. The fact is that the city is, through the mayor's office, through MDHA, is causing some amount of infrastructure dollars to happen through TIF rather than through the capital spending
process.
plan. And that's a fact. And like one of the things I've heard offline, not here, from developers, some who've received TIF, some who have not, is that so the planning department and planning commission will make a developer do a certain amount of infrastructure nearby, and then it's sort of the lottery whether you're covered in a TIF district or not, because there's people who are in a TIF district who've tried to get TIF and for whatever reasons can't, or are still being told do X millions of dollars of infrastructure improvements, on the nearby streets. There's other people who are in a redevelopment district and have managed to get TIF, and then there's somebody who's maybe outside a redevelopment district who is like National Yards, that is being told you need to do a certain amount of infrastructure. And I think there's some words I hear from some development community people of that's sort of a weird way to run your railroad, that you demand the infrastructure from everybody. Some people can get repaid for it, some people can't. You guys are maybe closer to that than I am, but Does it make sense how the city does infrastructure or
Well,
requires infrastructure?
there are two or three issues embedded in what you just said. I mean, one is the city, in essence, does force private developers to do some public infrastructure, you know, and so, like, we want our alleys to be bigger now. And so when you make certain changes, like I said, well, you got to widen the alley, you know, and so you just gave up 5 feet of your lot, the length of the lot, because they made you widen the alley, which was for the public benefit. We have nice big sidewalks downtown all around the convention center, and it looks great, you know, but the developers haven't paid the cost of that. And the hotels are a good example because we know what factors went into the TIF decisions there. Will you sign a room block agreement or will you not? Because we need some less expensive hotel rooms to attract these conventions. And JW Marriott said no, and they were told no TIF. The Westin said, yes, we will sign one of those agreements. They were given some TIF. They both had to expand the sidewalks. And so they're really two independent decisions. The planning department is requiring, I mean, the Nashville Next plan and everything else is, when we redevelop this area, we want to have X feet wide sidewalks instead of these narrow sidewalks. And so I say, developer, this is the price of poker. If you want to build a hotel, you need to build nice big sidewalks all around it.
Yeah, and in my experience, it has, well, TIF is a cost that is allocated by statute to infrastructure. The decision of whether you got TIF wasn't as a part of the capital plan. It was something to deliver an objective that was out there that needed to be accomplished. So trolley barns, when it was done in 2012, we got a small sliver of TIF to be able to go, but that was to, you know, bring those buildings back to life that were at the edge of a, you know, and that was just, so and I guess by that, what I'm saying is that there's an objective on top of the infrastructure.
So that's helpful. So if somebody who's in a redevelopment district has complained saying they're making me do X million dollars worth of infrastructure, and that developer has so far not had any luck with TIF previously, I guess your working theory would be, yeah, you're probably not going to get TIF just to do infrastructure, and
Right.
maybe there's not some other objective that you are able to accomplish.
There was a time when, like at AT&T, where you were trying to get office downtown because there wasn't any new office. And there was a time when office was aplenty, and so to incentivize an office building with TIF was just not going to happen. So,
Then you did the same thing residential.
right,
downtown, right?
residential, some of those early TIF deals were on Church Street that you got TIF to be able to make them happen, and once that market was proved, you didn't get TIF for new residential.
And I would add too, to your analogy about, you know, whether you're in the redevelopment district and you get TIF or whether you're out and you don't, I mean, at some level, someone has made a policy decision for the city as to what the boundaries of that TIF district are, which is not necessarily arbitrary. Now, as you get further and further out, maybe it does become a little more arbitrary, but at some point somebody made the decision that if you're in this area, then that is an area where you could at least qualify for it as opposed to being on the other side of the street.
And Bob, one thing on this use issue that I was talking about, now, who gets to choose that and how that decision is made, that needs to be public, transparent, understood, and out there. But it goes back to Richard's point on room blocks, for example. There's always an
Or whatever the need is 5 years from now.
correct.
Parks or historic preservation or green space, right?
Right.
Well, and I guess that goes to that early thing we talked about making sure there's a process for the periodic reassessment about if there's more investment in this district, what's it directed at accomplishing?
Okay, can I be devil's advocate just for a moment? Because the conversation is kind of leaning toward downtown and the big projects, because on the other side, you hear the argument that those are not going through the capital appropriations process. And then you provide these TIF loans, and then there are limited resources, therefore, in the communities to build sidewalks. It reduces the availability outside of the downtown area. How do you, or how do we address that tap on our shoulders to say, don't forget about this?
Well,
I have an answer.
The tap on,
I'd like to hear yours first.
right, they tap on our shoulder, right?
well, so I had,
Or whisper in your ear?
No, your suggestions were good, but I had initially suggested reassessing periodically whether to keep going. You guys tweaked it to reassess periodically what should be the focus. But I probably needs to be a blend of how much to keep going with and what the focus should be. Because we could imagine scenarios where people felt different ways at different times.
I just think that if we're silent on it, that those that have tapped us on our shoulder will feel like we didn't address that as an issue, have
I think there's
a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to potentially combat that. One is by being intentional going forward, whether it's a program that allows smaller type projects to access TIF, of saying we are going to proactively look to do things and focus in some districts that don't look like downtown and that don't look like the Gulch, so that other people, and to urge TIF 101, and I think that's going into the community, right? Not even asking people to come to MDHA for those informational sessions, but going into the community centers and advertising it just like we were on the 6th. But the second thing that I can't let go the last 5 or 6 years is when we, as a city, make investments into downtown
I know.
and to some other economic areas.
It helps everyone.
Yeah, take away TDZ, etc. for a second. But that is one of the few places the city can think proprietary and think, where do we invest proprietary on an ROI, right? Where can we invest $1 and get back a 5, 6, 20x return on that? But it's also incumbent upon us to be able to show, because of the dividends coming off of downtown,
Your community.
yeah, here's where we're reinvesting those at Goldsville and Donaldson and Bellevue, because if it's done right and articulated right, the people tapping you on the shoulder should
Saying, "What
have just
about-"
as much at stake in downtown as those who live and work and are doing projects downtown. My property taxes went down this last reappraisal because they went up downtown, right? I mean, and it's,
Or in Cleveland Park.
yeah, no. I mean, I'm not saying just
But
exclusively downtown.
I agree with
but-
everything you're saying, but we need to have a strong voice in whatever report that we issue
And I
about
think
this.
what's so hard about it is, if you're
Whatever report we
doing TIF
issue,
right, you ought to
very
be
strong
growing the
voice.
pie.
Right.
You know, I mean, you ought to be generating a lot more revenue, like you said, I mean, 10 or 20 times
Right.
the revenue. And so there ought to be more money in the capital improvements budget, not less. But it's hard to prove that.
Well, you take the first two budget, and I don't want to get into
Yeah.
a property tax debate.
So it's documenting, again,
Yeah.
once again, telling that story and documenting.
But you take your first two budgets where you had $120 million in new revenue, right? And to be able to specifically show people where and how that's being
And
reinvested.
that was real.
Right,
Okay?
right.
That was real because of all of the development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In much to the plan that we looked at the end of last meeting, some kind of table chart, here, your investment delivered this amount of money,
Strong
that
voice.
you just, having that documentation working through the process, I think helps that. Whether people believe, it may not change what people believe, but it does provide a set of facts that are out there
So-
for people to look to.
I totally agree. We'll have to figure out, I don't know whether that's planning that figures out that bang for the buck, or who does it. I have felt for a while that when measurements like that happen, I think they would be more credible if they were stated as a range.
Sure.
As
I
opposed
agree.
to, you know,
Penny.
sometimes you talk to,
$582.34.
yeah, sometimes you talk to economic development people and like they never met a bad deal ever. And it's all worth a gazillion dollars. And I think by and large, like, I don't know if they're considered credible. So I would love to be able to, because this whole how to measure it thing, we've talked about it a few different ways. I'd love for us to recommend as neutral a party as possible doing the measuring, hopefully with a range of metrics or a couple different ways to look at it.
And we can't be the only city in the world that's
There are
trying
models
to do
out
this.
there.
Oh,
I think
yeah, definitely.
Brian knows something of those
Well,
models.
and there also is a,
Firms that
you know,
do
a
this.
subjective component to that too, back when we get into the public good piece of that, which is, you know, the ability, the government has the ability to think differently than Bert, right? Bert has to think
I gotta make
about-
money.
Right, you gotta make
Period.
money, you gotta think, you have a higher cost of borrowing, and you gotta think about short-term, medium-term, long-term, where the government has the ability, both with cost of borrowing and kind of what it's set up to do is to think 30 years out, 40 years out, and be able to say, well, developing this parcel for this X, for this use, is more important to us than letting the market ultimately dictate that, because we know that matches the public good. And I don't know how all that fits in, but I mean, I do
Yeah.
fundamentally believe that on the whole, the ROI, we have to meet the ROI test, but we can't discount just the public good and the government's function of that, which is to look something more than just a 3-year horizon
And
or
we're
a
not going to
15-year
haul agree on what
amortization.
that is.
That's
I
right.
think we got to
Right.
have green space, and you may think we got to have transit.
Right.
You know.
So we've got a couple of clients that have a 100-year timeline, and their acquisition strategy is based on that kind of time frame as opposed to, I've got to get a 15 IRR.
And I got to exit in 5 years,
Right.
or 4 years, or
3,
7 years.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the value of being a city, is the city's being built for our grandchildren, not for us.
All right, it feels like we almost have it all figured out.
Transparency,
close.
yes.
I think you're closer than what you think. I do.
We've been sort of doing this free range conversation.
Hey, this design review thing that you got?
Yeah.
So I worked on the downtown code back when it was implemented, whenever it was. There are certain, it's really, there's certain purview that planning has in their planning guidelines that is kind of a by the book sort of thing, even in a form-based code. MDHA has, I think, more flexibility than is in that downtown code, for better or for worse. But I think that there's, I'm not sure it's duplication. There actually are two different things that they could be looking at the same time. So just, I think that that's, as we start looking at, oh, we're going to set this one here or set this one there, there are two, they're not necessarily looking at the same thing.
I think that's a good point, a fair point. The thing I know there's a spectrum of opinions. There's some opinions that go something like, well, I haven't heard anybody complain about the way it works, so it must be fine. And the other end of the spectrum, I've heard some people downtown talk about, like, what they get advised to do by their design people is to go get an informal answer from planning about what planning will say if MDHA approves it, and then the informal process is you get suggestions, try this, try that, then you formally go to MDHA, and then after you formally go to MDHA, you formally go back to planning. And that's the professional advice about how to approach the city on getting something downtown through.
I would think that that's, if, there's probably not, so to me, the way projects are done, if you're going to walk in with your set of plans and just drop it in there and walk it through the queue without talking through the process ahead of time, I mean, you are potentially wasting months.
1 in 100.
Well, I mean, no, I mean,
Yeah.
you ought to always be working and talking to staff before you go through this process all the way through, because if not, you don't pick up the issues that you've got. You're always doing that, whether it's a TIF district, downtown,
And these days,
whatever.
you frequently are going to wind up needing an SP, which means you're going to have to be dealing with council, which means you're going to be having a public meeting, and so you're making more design changes to try and appeal to the neighbors. So they won't say, oh, please don't vote for this.
Well, you guys are the pros of this. The one in particular, and I think this will bubble up with the transit-oriented development, is one of the scenarios I'm talking about wasn't a new building. It was getting new signage, and that's one of the reasons there was Donaldson business owner pushback was a bunch of existing property owners are somewhat familiar with what happens downtown on like signage things and didn't want to deal with MDHA for the rest of their lives on that. But I'm not the expert on this.
We have a sign that is, so we own the building, St. Cloud corner where Puckett's is, and had some signage issues there. We eventually got some and didn't get some, but I don't think it was as much design review as it was whoever else. Is there somebody else that does sign review downtown?
Well, the downtown code addresses signs specifically.
Yeah.
And gives you the allotment through there. And MDHA actually adopted the downtown code sign guidelines. And so if you meet that, we don't even see a sign. But if you're trying to get a modification for what you're trying to do, as the downtown code is written and was approved, those modifications come through MDHA's design review committee. If you're in the downtown code outside an MDHA redevelopment district, you would go through the downtown code's design review process.
What if you're in a district that's not in the downtown code?
Then MDHA does have some signage guidelines. We have some that are specific. We have some that are general that go into effect.
How many actually get turned down
Signs?
that come back to you?
They don't always
In the downtown
happen
code?
right away, I promise.
Well, I mean, we just this week we approved the sign going up for, it required modifications for the Nashville Symphony. There was one out in front of the building. And
For
so-
Nashville what?
Symphony.
Yeah.
And so that one came on through. Most of them hit with the downtown code, because the downtown code had and this is, and things have changed over the years, as the councilman has said, and we work very closely with the planning department now. The downtown code was opened up, and as you may recall, they got the zoning part passed, but the sign part didn't pass, and they had to continue to work on the sign part. And there was an enormous amount of input that was put in to that. And so while we did, at the time, we had the most stringent sign regulations. But after the downtown code was put in place, we purposely went back to the council and we adopted the downtown code as our signage regulations because they had gone through the public process. They had gotten all the input from everybody and had adopted that. MDHA and Donaldson went through and adopted the urban design overlay in there. And I believe you're correct, there weren't any signage guidelines, but we did adopt some other signage guidelines that went along with that.
The only reason I ask that is I'm just the type of person that sometimes I think we overregulate some things. And if there's an opportunity to simplify processes and move things through quicker for everyone, is to everyone's advantage.
Signs can be.
So I don't know where the line is drawn, but sometimes we just look too many times.
The funny thing is now we have a ton of regulations on signs, and I think most people would drive downtown, right through downtown right now, and not be entirely happy with the final product, even though it's heavily regulated.
Just
But
just an
Well,
observation.
here's what I'm convinced of over the last 5 minutes.
Just an observation.
Signs and design review are not tax increment financing. And
That's
so
right. Let's move on.
I think that maybe we stick in a recommendation to keep, like, encourage planning and MDHA to keep working on streamlining it as much as possible.
And I think
And that if
there
there
are
are-
current conversations around that.
And if there are opportunities for us to streamline processes that we have, let's take advantage of those as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so we shall never speak of design review again in this group.
That's a
You did
great
it.
idea.
I know I started
I
it by
lived with
putting it in
that.
here. My apologies for that.
fun.
Well, it's almost 2:30, and we've talked about a bunch of, like, almost all the stuff on here, at least to one degree or another. And I want to spend a little bit of time at least talking about the public meeting on March 6th. And so why don't we try to figure out where we're leaving this and what we're doing next, and then move on to talk about.
Have you and Brian talked about what resources are going to be needed
No,
to
I haven't heard
put
from
it
Brian
together?
about that. I haven't called him either. We haven't talked about it.
Okay.
I just want
Just
to make
let
sure.
us know if you need help. And I don't know who, but
We
let us know.
do need help.
I think this diversity of TIF recipients, to me, is really a critical issue, because I think that the more that we're able to increase the size, the borrowers, the things that, just that whole piece, so it's not viewed as an insider's game, the more valuable, the more people that understand it, the better off the whole system is.
And I'd be interested in Paulette's thoughts on this, but the way I think to address both the perception and the reality of that is, obviously we know we can't set specific targets to say X number of TIF dollars or TIF loans will go to X, Y, and Z, but I think it is incumbent upon us, and this has been a lot of the conversation today, to make sure that we're putting kind of a proactive strategy and a proactive process in place that people will know that they have more access, but that ultimately will lead to a more diverse product, both from a diversity standpoint, but also geographically.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I think it's very important for us to say where TIF is and what it does, that kind of introductory overview. And then, because I think there's some realities that people aren't aware of. I think a lot of people didn't know that it primarily has to be for infrastructure. The expectation was, you see this building going up, it got TIF money, so it went for the building. And I think that kind of nuance, and not necessarily nuance because it's in the legislation, is important. I think also optics are very important, and sometimes they don't portray what the reality is. Because we've heard this, and I'm sure individually we've heard this, people perceive that it only goes to shiny new projects that are very, very large, and that by their size exclude a lot of people. And I think overcoming that is going to be very important. Another point related to that is people perceive that it only happens downtown, and that there is a critical need for Nashville to have an orientation for the whole city. And that's why I like the planning department orientation, that it's not parcel by parcel, but maybe some targeted areas for removing blight or whatever. So I think, and all of those things are interrelated. But if we don't know the baseline of where we are from the beginning, we wouldn't be able to tell if there's progress or not. I think we had some data presented somewhere early on about the number of loans and the type or something like that. I don't think we need to have hundreds and hundreds of pages on this, but just kind of an overview so that people can begin to see and understand that there are possibilities. I think another thing is that people don't see, I think there is an expectation that there are more creative approaches to using TIF that we're not exploring and not utilizing. And there's very, very little conversation about what could be. I think something like the fact that IDB can be used for affordable housing, and that even IDB has access to TIF, but they've only done one such project. I mean, those are the kinds of things that people don't understand, don't hear about, and some of them I didn't know, and that's one of the reasons I think this is a very, very good experience. And that to the extent that we can convey the information to others. I think the other thing is that people perceive that there are barriers that are inherently, that exist for some but not for others. And so if there's any way of overcoming, helping people to understand that it is a complex process. And the example that we gave today about the $100,000 TIF financing for $500,000, those kinds of things, average citizens may not know, and helping them understand that I think will go a long way. But we've got to do something else other than downtown and big buildings. Yeah. However we do that, that's going to be crucial, or we're going to keep having the same problems.
I agree 100%.
And I agree too. I will say, I think they're different tools for different things. Mm-hmm. And if you ask me in a vacuum, is TIF what you would use to fund affordable housing? I'd say I think they're probably better tools in the toolbox than TIF for affordable housing. But I think TIF is getting a lot of negative attention, as Paulette said. And that's why we're trying to figure out some way to build into this program some of these other things we're talking about. And I'm fine with that, but we're doing it for political reasons, not necessarily because we all sat down and said, this would be the smartest way to solve this problem, is to take TIF money and put it into affordable housing.
Well, and I think as a part of this process, what we're trying to do is reinstitute some public confidence in
Yes.
the TIF process,
That's right?
And so political reasons, or trying to build some confidence back around it, that this can be a valuable tool in the toolbox when understood, when used appropriately. But what was so fascinating, that last panel we had with the affordable housing developers, they talked about a capital stack that had 11 or 12 different
Exactly.
And maybe there was TIF, but TIF was just one small piece of the pie, overall complicated.
It was very incidental.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm really excited about, not to kind of in conjunction, Paul, with what you've said, at this public hearing on March 6th, I think being able to get a lot of those issues so that we can answer, they're going to come in groups of types of issues, needs to be outside of just downtown, needs to be able to work on this. We ought to be able to, at the end of this, answer every one of those questions and answer them either by a current fact or a change in policy. And I think
or a section what TIF is not.
Yeah.
Common myths.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
The myths and the facts.
But that's why I'm excited about having that, because that will give us hopefully a universe of issues to work towards.
Councilman, you're just assuming that people are talking and the committee's there to listen, correct? That's the format.
Committee is there to listen that day, is what I've assumed.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
We're just there to listen.
I'm just there to listen.
let's let's before
You're
there to listen, Paulette.
No, I'm listening. I may not even be there.
So let's swing through that was great, Paulette, and the points you guys just added. Resources are going to be an issue. Like, my inbox is already way too big. Like, I can't sit down and write this. So
We're slaying. You need to talk to Brian, but I'll go back and see if we've got anybody that might be able to assist.
Who can help write? So we really need somebody that can help put this together, and you really wish that they could have been here the whole time.
They can always watch the count, and it is grueling when you miss a meeting to sit there and watch it. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I mean, if we can find the ultimate person who could put this together in the scribe, we could also all, I mean, you're going to end up with kind of like your memo, I think you had 10, but you're going to end up with probably 5 or 6 kind of topic areas that each of us could take a page, right? It's nothing more than bullet points, and see if we can get consensus around that kind of particular topic. If we had somebody to feed it to, who then could embellish that into something a little more professional.
But in terms of length, it's going to be 10, 15 pages?
I don't know. It could be as big as we let it be. I mean,
Needs to be easily
I think. Well,
Yeah,
let me ask you guys this.
Remember, we used the model of the Human Relations Commission's Affordable Housing 101 and
Yeah.
those two
Who
things.
put that together for them?
That's a good place for me to
I
go.
know Austin had a lot to do with the first one, and I don't know about the second one because there were a lot of Vanderbilt graduate students who were involved with that one.
I'll talk to Mel Fowler Green.
Yeah.
About how she did that, because that really is nice work product. Well, let me ask this question. So we are supposed to be done in 6 months. That would be the end of April. I'm sure if we all said, "Gee, council, can we have more time?" We're like almost there. We could get more
I was
time.
thinking less.
But I'm assuming
I need time to finish the minutes.
we all consider it important to be done on time.
Yeah.
Right. And frankly, that drives the length of the whole thing, because that means there's barely 60 days, and it's gonna be as good as it can be in that time period.
Among some things that can help us formulate it, we have fairly comprehensive minutes. We have that library resource kind of thing. We can have those kinds of things in an appendix.
Yes.
And not have to spend a lot of time
Right.
on
Rehashing.
some of those kinds of things.
You could make an executive
Yeah, and
summary that's less
I've
than
thought
5
about
pages.
even
And executive summary.
like on the YouTube videos are not segregated into a separate spot. Like we could ask them to and I'm sure that's just clicking mouses and stuff. We could segregate those, but that document library, I mean, we'd be crazy to, I'm not sure that we should go spending time trying to write a 3-page summary of a 60-page document.
I agree.
We've got the 60-page document. We didn't come up with all those materials because we were trying to overwhelm the world. We came up with them because we were trying to be transparent, and it's complex, and you have to actually read that stuff to understand it. Well,
I've got one comment. I would hate to have spent from 6 months, and at the end of that 6-month period, have people as confused about what's going on
yeah.
as they were when we
The
started.
magic is going to happen in 5 or 6 pages.
So whatever. I think to end up at a spot where people are, we haven't put something in place where people are still suspicious, angry, frustrated, confused would be, and so I don't know how to get there, but
Yeah.
it would be a waste
Well,
of that.
I totally agree.
I think you can kind of look at us as kind of a microcosm, because some of us came in knowing more technical things about TIF, others of us came in knowing what concerns there are in the community, and I think we've all educated each other about those things. And I think what we're trying to do with this report is to try and
Balance.
bring all that together and say, this is what our committee learned. This is how it's worked.
Well, and honestly, I think anybody who's being very technical minded can read our materials to their heart's content. I think and I wrote it all down, the sort of off the top of her head outline that Paulette went through about what it needs to cover. I think, frankly, that's, an outline to start with, the idea of collecting all the questions into categories and getting that into myths or frequently asked questions, or making sure we address or make a recommended change, explain or recommended change. I mean, that's probably as far as we can get today as what we're going to get to. We do have to find a resource to help put stuff together. It's totally doable. but it's going to take some resources. All right, so March 6th. I had thought that we're not answering questions, we're there listening, and there's the little timer up on the board, and I think 3 minutes it's either 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I think we just err on the 3 minutes and listen to folks. I guess I'll do just a several minute introduction at the beginning to this point about transparency and not wasting our efforts to let people who are there know what we've done and where they can find the work and where we're at in the process and when we're going to be the finish line. I think that would be helpful, and then just let folks talk, I'm sure more than one of us will try to capture the categories of questions. I'll do that. The advertising it. Seriously.
Yeah, we've gotten the flyers that you sent.
Yeah.
And I was at the NAP meeting yesterday. Bert had already called their director, and I made sure they made another announcement at the meeting, and they said they would make sure they had several people there on that side.
Good.
I called Rusty Lawrence at Urban Housing Solutions. He thought he could come. So,
All right.
I think we're going to have some people there.
Yeah. I think just make sure y'all actually send it out
I'll
to folks.
tweet it out.
Good.
You're so good at that. What if we had a public hearing and nobody came?
I think we don't have to risk that on this.
That's good.
Do you want a headline on Nashville.gov?
I would like it
Yeah.
if Metro's channels could push this info out.
Yeah,
Do
put
you
it
have
on
the little
Metro
card
3
that goes along
and
the bottom?
okay.
The little banner thing.
Like I don't know who Facebooks and tweets for the city, but that
I
would be
can
good.
follow up on those.
So in your short introduction, are you going to get into anything at all about preliminary thoughts we've had about where we're going with this?
About what?
No, I
Preliminary
don't.
thoughts about where we.
I don't think
where we are
we're.
in the process?
I don't think we're necessarily ready for prime time on
Okay.
our thoughts.
Those are people watching us on television.
Right.
I think it's important to say that there have been people attending the meetings. It's been available on Channel 3. We have an open website for questions, and we have gotten some. And we just want to make sure we're covering as many bases as possible to hear from the public on this very important issue, or something to that effect.
And I would encourage them to submit written things too. We'll get some better input on that.
Yeah.
Somebody stand up 3 minutes and talking.
That's a good point.
We've
And then-
got the website where they can
Right.
submit their
And then you all
questions.
know we're gonna be together 2 days later. So
Yeah, that's still on my calendar. So
Is that the
is
8th?
confirmed?
yes,
Okay,
What day of the week is that?
Friday.
Friday.
Oh, okay,
But
good.
that's our only March meetings.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything after
Do-
8th.
So we don't have anything scheduled after the 8th.
We kind of noted you were getting into spring break and other things.
Then it's into spring break.
Yeah.
Should we pick another date, or
You want to wait till the 8th?
let's just decide on the 8th? Because we might move to writing, hopefully,
Yeah.
after the 8th. Or somebody writing.
There you go. There you go.
Well, I am eager to see the start to come together.
All right, anybody else got anything else? Really appreciate everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Brian is absent. I wonder what happened to him.
I think he had another job responsibility to take care of tonight.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.